started the recording. Would you like to start on the topic of evolution, or should I? I think since you are making the positive claim here, it's better that you start on this.
The positive claim that biological evolution occurs, you mean?
Well, there are different definitions of evolution. That is why.
Right. I'd go with that biological evolution is change and inheritance. So change meaning that there's no such thing as a static population. So all populations change. And then in terms of inheritance, we know that Mendelian genetics, it works. And so change and inheritance, I would say, in populations of organisms. I think that's a pretty good definition. And I think it's really obvious that that it happens. So
just to make one point regarding evolution, right? Generally, when most people are challenging evolution from the intelligent design side, or generally Muslims, or even people who don't grow up in the West, right? We don't contest with these things. Change happens over time.
You don't contest. You don't contest what? Sorry.
The things you mentioned, change happening over time. The claim that the involvement of Mendelian genetics, these things are not controversial. The two main points which are controversial are universal common ancestry, and that this is basically a blind random process without an intelligent creator. These are the controversial topics. So change over time or observational change over time, right? These things are not an issue for us, right? We don't.
Right. I would say they're not really like controversial in the biological academia. Because like what I said about change and inheritance, I mean, universal common ancestry is essentially going to be like a direct consequence of that. Because I mean, there's no other process by which we know, organisms can have the same sequences, for example, because we know DNA is a unit of inheritance. So that means if you share DNA with another organism, there has to be common ancestry because there's no other mechanism, no other model that actually explains that. So,
okay, when I said controversial, I did not mean in terms of biologists or mainstream evolutionary biologists. I meant in terms of people who are generally challenging evolution, and I think I mentioned this. Now, as far as the argument for universal common ancestry goes, right? Here's the problem with the point you made. Just because there is change over time, or that inheritance over time, or things change, right? It doesn't logically follow from that universal common ancestry is true. Now, just to go into some of the evidence regarding this topic, the main argument generally given for universal common ancestry is the similarity of living things, whether it's in morphology, anatomy, it's in genetics, or in other cases. The main argument always is that there are similarities among living things. These are highly unlikely to happen due to chance, and therefore they are due to common descent. I don't think it follows.
Yes.
Now you can make a further argument here, but I have some more things to say regarding this as well. But you can make a first point.
So I do think it follows because they essentially, I mean, in the past couple decades, as far as I know, there's been a lot of advancements in phylogenetics, where they do look at morphology and they do look at genetics. And a lot of the time we can sort of match these things with something called fossil calibrations. So I actually have them written down as well, like fossil calibrations in terms of like what the data on the molecular clocks show and what the data in terms of like fossil, like radiometric dating and so forth. And a lot of the time they match, and that's why it's called a calibration. So that's like one example I have.
Okay, so in the reference I've seen and the literature I've seen in this regard, just to address the point about the phylogenetic trees matching, I don't think they match. In fact, there are a lot of evidences for them not matching, and in fact, because of them not matching, ad hoc explanations such as horizontal gene transfer exists. But this is just regarding the phylogenetic trees. I think there's a problem with the logic of this argument as well. The claim that similarities are due to common descent, it's faulty. Just to give one reason for this, similarities do not have to equal common descent, they can also be due to common design. But there's another reason for this. So, this is just one conceptual reason for similarities. There's another massive problem for the evolutionary claim. There are an absolutely massive amount of similarities in living things that cannot possibly be due to common descent. These are called convergent evolution or homoplasy. So, these are two problems for this claim. There's a third one. Mainly, actually, you know what? You can respond to these two, and then I'll bring the third one. Otherwise, it would just things would get lost in the discussion.
So you said convergent evolution is an argument against common ancestry?
I said that it is a counter example to the logic of this argument. The assumption is similarities are due to common descent, but there are an absolutely massive amount of similarities that are not due to common descent. So it is a problem for universal common ancestry.
I would say it's not, because if there's convergent evolution, then as far as I understand, that's most likely because the environment has like similar what would you call it, similar selection pressures. And so, I mean, you can see it in I think lungfish. So lungfish are like the modern version of what you might think like an ancient Sarcopterygian would have looked like. So Sarcopterygians are like a clade. I think they're called what are they called? I forget. It's lobe-finned fish, I think. And yeah, lungfish are like extant lobe-finned fish, and we know there's stuff like developmental genes in modern lungfish that are like the same genes that work for like limb formation, and other fish don't have those. So we share those with lungfish, for example. Yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but that's like one example of convergent evolution.
So basically, from what I understood of what you said, that convergent evolution is the similarities they are explained by environmental conditions, and therefore that is not a counterexample to the argument for common ancestry. But
Yeah.
let's suppose I accept that,
So, I
right?
mean, a lungfish is really good at being a lungfish, so it didn't really need to specialize further into any like specific clades. I mean, they stayed at the Sarcopterygian clade level, which, by the way, humans are also Sarcopterygians in cladistic terms. So, yeah, that's the point I wanted to make.
Okay, so I think there are multiple problems with this. One thing is, for the sake of argument, I'll accept that these similarities are due to environmental constraints, right? If this is true, then this is a problem for the argument for common ancestry, because that argument was the similarities are due to common descent because they cannot be due to chance. But this is showing that similarities can be due to environmental constraints. So this would be one problem in this regard. But there's another problem in regards to the argument for evolution, and that is based on Occam's razor and basically common design. So here's this. Just give me a couple of minutes. I'll make this argument, and it will take a couple of minutes, but just bear with me on this. So the common case for evolution, right? The case typically is that physical processes can explain, and changes among living things can explain all the diversity of life. If someone is invoking an intelligent designer, they are giving an extra explanation for this, which is violating Occam's razor, and hence the burden of proof would be on the person arguing for intelligent design. Now, keep this version of Occam's razor in mind. When we look at the similarities on living things, there are an absolutely massive amount of similarities that are supposedly due to common descent, and there are an absolutely massive amount of similarities that cannot possibly be due to common descent. If common descent is used as an explanation, then then for all of the convergent evolution similarities, you need to invoke a second explanation. Thus, you will have multiple explanations. Common design is simpler than common descent in this regard because common design can explain all of those similarities, the similarities that are supposedly due to common descent and similarities that are not due to common descent. So, common design using the same version of Occam's razor that is used to argue for evolution, it can be shown that common design is the simpler explanation than common descent, and hence it should be preferred. So, the logic of the argument is deeply flawed. You can respond.
Okay, I'm not sure if common design works really. Like I said, it's not really a model that explains the actual like accumulation of genetic diversity and so on. And in terms of convergent evolution, I don't really understand how that's a problem. I don't think it's a problem because I mean, in evolutionary biology, there's niches, right? So I mean, if we see convergent evolution in terms of like there's similarities in certain organisms because the niches that they're in have the same sorts of pressures, then I don't see how that's really a problem. I think that's just how those specific environments are. Like we have a lot of examples of convergent evolution of like eyes and all kinds of like flight, for example, is like has independently evolved and so forth. So I don't see how it's really like an issue. I think it's pretty well explained in biology.
Uh, I'll just make my last point regarding this, and then you can have final word, and then we'll move on to other stuff because I don't want to waste too much time on this. So here's why I think convergent evolution is a problem. Those are similarities that are not due to common descent. This is directly going in the face of the logic of arguments for universal common ancestry, which states that similarities are due to common descent. Plus, if we use Occam's razor as an explanation, which and the same Occam's razor that is used to argue for evolution, using that common design would be a simpler explanation, and hence, using the criteria atheists and evolutionary biologists themselves use, it should be preferred. Now, you can have the last word on this because then I want to move on to other stuff.
Sure. Can I get an example of two organisms with like convergently evolved, or what would you say, homologous structures that cannot have come from common descent? Like, is there any good examples?
I think there are a massive amount of examples of convergent evolutions, right? Uh, I think there is echolocation among bats and dolphins. I think that is one example, but all of these, the it's the point I'm not making as that these specific examples in and of themselves prove common design or that they cannot be due to common descent. The part about them not being due to common descent is admitted by even evolutionary biologists. The point I'm making is that the case for evolution is based on looking at a certain data and then giving the best explanation for it. The similarities are looked at as evidence, and the claim is made that common descent is the best explanation. But using Occam's razor, I would say that common design is the better explanation because it will explain all of the similarities. The similarities that are supposedly due to common descent and similarities that are not due to common descent. So that would be my position in this.
Right. I think not. Well, not really. I mean, in terms of Occam's razor, I mean, I think it goes back to the fundamentals. Like, if Mendelian genetics work and if organisms change, like, we know that it has to go back to common ancestry because there's no other way for those units of inheritance, those genes, those pieces of DNA, that everything is related. There's no other mechanism to actually explain any of that. That's how I see it.
Okay, so I don't want to waste more time on this. We can move on to something else now.
Okay.
We have discussed the logic of
Sure.
this argument. Right now, I think we can discuss the claim whether the phylogenetic trees match each other or not, because that was a point you brought up earlier. Now, I don't think they match each other, and if you look in the chat, I've linked multiple references for this. I can link even more if you like, but phylogenetic trees basically don't match either other, and uh, this is actually a problem for evolution. In fact, I can link a reference if you like. Richard Dawkins himself mentioned this as a test for evolution. He said that this is a test for evolution, and if evolution is true, phylogenetic trees are all supposed to match each other, but they don't match each other. So I would say that if we go by the test that Dawkins himself came up with, uh, evolution is falsified. You can respond.
Well, one point I would make is that Dawkins is not like a modern phylogeneticist, so I would not really look to Dawkins for that. I have talked to like actual phylogeneticists by email. I can give you one if you want. So I mean, Dawkins is not really an expert on this stuff. In terms of phylogenetic trees not matching, I'll look at the source you sent, but I mean, essentially, I mean, it's a statistical field, right? I mean, if there's not like good statistical data for a specific tree, and it's just like a tentative tree that's just there, that's just gonna be like, we'll just make it this way because that's we're low on data, for example. I mean, there's a lot of trees like that, but I mean, other trees are like very solid. Like we know, we know humans are like animals, for example, right? Like we know we're metazoans because we have a lot of, we share a lot of Hox genes and all these genetic similarities with all other animals, and we have a internal digestive tract, and we respire oxygen. That's the morphological evidence. So I mean, there's some clades. So in phylogenetics, there's clades, right? We try to determine clades. There's some clades that are really solid, and we know they're basically true, right? But essentially, you're saying that it's a problem that some phylogenetic trees don't have as much data for them, or like are more loose. Is that the argument?
No, that's not my argument. My argument is that phylogenetic trees constantly and routinely contradict each other. And this is not just my claim. Like, if you look at the chat, I've linked three references from them. I think I can even link references from Nature, which is the most prestigious scientific journal. This is not something new. This is actually a widespread phenomenon. And one more thing, in regards to Dawkins, I agree he's not an expert. This is why, in regards to whether phylogenetic trees contradict each other or not, I did not quote him. I quoted the mainstream geneticists and evolutionary biologists. And in fact, just to give one simple reason why we can know they contradict each other. We can know they contradict each other because ad hoc explanations such as horizontal gene transfer exists, which are supposed to explain the contradictions within phylogenetic trees. And if you like, I can link one specific reason for reference for why horizontal gene transfer was invoked in the first place. So that would be a problem. The problem is these trees contradict each other, and these contradictions are not just in one or two places, these are present throughout the tree of life. You can respond to this point while I link a couple more references.
Right. Well, this is really detailed stuff, so it's kind of hard to analyze it in real time. But I do see a quote here about incongruence between phylogenies derived from morphology and molecular analysis.
That's for a later time. That's a later discussion.
Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be some of those kinds of examples. Like you'll see two organisms that are like morphologically really similar, but like genetically really separate, and the opposite a lot of the time as well. I mean, that's just it's just how it is. It's pretty fuzzy work, basically. I mean, there's like I know there's like two types of beetles that are like 100 million years like diverged, but they almost look the same. There's like that's one example where like the morphology is like almost the same, but the genetics are super different. But I mean, I don't see how that's a problem either. What else?
I'll just make one more point and then you can respond and then we'll move on to something else. So I think it is a
Mm-hmm.
problem because, to be honest, this is the case for evolution. Like, this is seen as one of the strongest evidences for evolution that these trees are
Mm-hmm.
supposed to approximately match up, but they don't. And in fact, I've given a reference here. I think this is a recent reference from 2022. In fact, this is mentioning that lateral gene transfer, which is also called horizontal gene transfer, was invoked for this very reason, that phylogenetic trees contradict each other. So this is, I think this is a problem for evolution, and this argument cannot work because horizontal gene transfer exists. And let's suppose horizontal gene transfer is true, and I think in terms of bacteria or smaller organisms it is true, right? There is observational evidence for it there. If horizontal gene transfer is true, then it it is a further problem for the argument for universal common ancestry, because similarities are supposedly due to common descent, but similarities can
Mm-hmm.
also be due to horizontal gene transfer. Now you can have the last word on this, and then I want to move on to something else.
Yeah, I'm not sure if common descent is really contradictory to horizontal gene transfer, but I don't really know that much about horizontal gene transfer. I know bacteria does that, I think, like prokaryotes.
Can I just
But other
correct
than
one
that,
thing? No,
yeah,
see,
I'm not too sure. I'll have
can
to look into it.
no, see, can I just correct one thing and then you can respond? I'm not saying
Yeah.
horizontal gene transfer contradicts common descent. I am saying the argument for
Mm-hmm.
common descent is undermined by horizontal gene transfer. It can be true,
Mm-hmm.
it can conceivably be true that universal common ancestry is true and horizontal gene transfer is true at the same time. There is nothing inconceivable about this or unusual about this. The problem is that the argument for universal common ancestry is that similarities are due to common descent, but similarities can also be due to common horizontal gene transfer. So that's just my position on this. I'm not saying these that because horizontal gene transfer exists, common descent is false. I'm saying just that the argument for common descent, universal common descent, is undermined by horizontal gene transfer. So that would be my position regarding this.
Interesting. Okay, I'll have to look into that further. I'm not sure what to add about that.
So since I brought up the previous argument regarding evolution, you can bring up something else you would like to discuss regarding this topic.
Something else. I mean, we went over the basics. Hmm. I mean, do you want to explain what kind of model you want to propose, or like, is there some kind of explanatory model you have?
Uh, in regards to models of evolution, right? And basically, is common design science or not? I think there's a lot of discussion there, and I don't think that's generally relevant to the topic. In a sense, it is, but in a sense, it's not. Here's why. There's a lot of controversy regarding whether common design is science or not. Most, or if not all, mainstream evolutionary biologists will say it's not science, right? Almost all of them will say this, if not all of them. But regardless of whether it's science or not, or regardless of whether we can give models or not, I don't think that really that deals with or that is related to the argument here, the argument for universal common ancestry, because you can have tons of models based on universal common ancestry, based on the assumption of the arguments for universal common ancestry that similarities are mainly due to common descent. And common design is if intelligent design someday becomes science, or if intelligent design theorists come up with more models regarding this. They could also come up with models based on the assumption that similarities are based on common descent or common design. But all of that, I think it's not relevant to this argument, because the main evidence in this regard is that similarities are due to common descent or common design. So whether you have model or not, I don't think that's particularly relevant, because you could have tons of models or potential models based on either assumption of common descent or common design. What we have to look at is what is supported by the evidence. So that would be my point regarding this. You can have the last word, or if you want to discuss some further things in this regard, we can do that as well.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. My phone just died randomly.
Yeah, no problem.
Uh,
I have issues like
I
that as
I
well.
asked you. I think I asked you about like what kind of model do you have, or like what kind of uh, yeah, essentially what kind of model can you present that explains the current data?
Okay. Just to briefly address this point, I don't have any specific models regarding how it of evolution or how life emerged. Like personally, coming
Mhm.
from an Islamic point of view, these things are not specified in the Quran. And just to make one thing relevant in this regard, it the universal common ancestry potentially can be true, and it wouldn't contradict with Islam. The only disagreement we would have is that we would say Adam alayhi salam was a special creation, right? But other than that, universal common ancestry in and of itself would not be a problem for Islam. We don't have any specific models in this regard. In fact, my argument is not based on a specific model. My argument regarding common ancestry or it being false or it not being supported by evidence is based on Occam's razor. It's not based on a specific model, and to
Okay.
be honest, I don't have a specific
Essentially,
model.
you're just poking holes into the current model in biology.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that using the same criteria being used to argue for evolution, I would say I'm giving evidence for common for design instead of common descent. So this is positive evidence. It's just not a specific model. That's how I would put it.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not sure if if there's anything really useful about that. I mean, there would need to be some sort of framework, some sort of explanatory model that makes predictions and so forth that we can actually supplant with you know to replace the current model essentially. I mean, if you don't have that, then it's kind of like you're just poking holes, and then what we have is we're just at I don't know, and let's start again, like that kind of thing. Um, so I'm not sure how useful that is, but I don't know. I think the current model in biology after 140 years is really solid, and you know I don't think this is really a controversial issue. I think creationism is more of like a cultural phenomenon than it is like an actual thing that should be really taken seriously.
Uh, I just want to address a couple of things here. Firstly, you said that it's not useful. I would say in response to that, if something is true or if something is supported by Occam's razor or evidence, that in and of itself is something useful. Truth would be something useful. Uh, so that would be one point regarding this. Secondly, in regards to your claim that the standard evolutionary model is basically solid, really solid for 140 years, I don't think it is. In fact, there was a conference in 2016. I think it was in England where basically mainstream evolutionary biologists came, and they themselves are poking various holes in the neo-Darwinian standard model. In fact, this is the reason the third way of evolution exists. Those guys are not intelligent design theorists. They are not creationists. They are seriously against these these positions,
Mm.
but they also think the neo-Darwinian model of evolution is false. So that would be my response
I
to
think
this.
the conference. I think the conference you're mentioning is it was like more about like do we switch to the extended synthesis over the modern synthesis, which is neo-Darwinianism, Darwinianism. Sorry. Um, so it's more about like do we like add another layer, like make a new model, like that springs out of the modern synthesis. I think that's more the point of that conference, but I could be wrong. I think I've read about it, but I mean, essentially the problem is that the modern synthesis or like neo-Darwinism, it doesn't include stuff like Evo Devo and like stuff that we've found out about like in the last 20 or 30 years. So that's probably what the conference was about there. But yeah, like I've talked to a lot of biologists via email, and it really doesn't seem like there's like a crisis in like biology or anything. There's poll stats on this, it's not really an issue. So
Uh, I would agree with most of what you said, but not all. There are problems with neo-Darwinian evolution, and this is why the extended synthesis or the third way of evolution is proposed. And so this is something we agree on. But just to make another point, I am not saying that the mainstream evolutionary biologists, or even most, if not all, of the evolutionary biologists have turned away from evolution and became creationists. That is not what I am saying. My arguments so far have been two. Using the same philosophical assumption that is used to argue for evolution, you could uh, that would undermine basically the argument for common descent. It will show the common design is a simpler explanation. And based on what mainstream evolutionary biologists themselves are saying, phylogenetic trees contradict each other. Now, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that they think evolution is false. I'm saying they think evolution is true. They just don't think that these trees match, and that this is why they have to come up with explanations like horizontal gene transfer. Uh, I think we had enough of a discussion on this topic. If you like, I can go into another argument regarding evolution, and we can have a short discussion on the fossil record specifically, because that is a topic that interests me a lot as well in regards to evolution. So,
yeah, we can do fossils.
would you like to start on this, or should I?
Yeah, I think the fossil record is pretty good. I mean, we got everything from like the simplest like single-celled um, organisms. Like I think the oldest fossils are like 3.8 to like 4 billion years old, something like that. And yeah, they're these like microfossils, and all the way to like essentially like a couple 100,000 years ago, and so with like archaic Homo sapien remains and all that stuff. So I mean, I think there's a really good tapestry of evidence in the fossil record for like especially human evolution. But yeah, I mean, even though fossilization is like a really like rare event, I think we've got a lot of data to talk about there. So
Uh, in regards to the fossil record, I don't think it is evidence for evolution. In fact, I think it's one of the biggest problems for evolution. The main reason for that is the fossil record. If we look at it, it's not gradual like Darwinian evolution predicts. It's or neo-Darwinian evolution predicts. It's sudden and abrupt, and this abruptness it's not just present in the Cambrian explosion. It is present throughout the history of life. For instance, if you look in the comments, I've linked a reference regarding the fossil record of mammals and birds being abrupt as well. And there are numerous other cases like this. So I don't think fossil record supports evolution. But other than that, I also think that there is a problem with for the evolutionary biologists using this as evidence for evolution. The reason is if fossils are present, That is supposed to be evidence for evolution and compatible with evolution. If fossils are absent, that is dismissed as because of the fossil record being poor. But how is evolution falsifiable in this regard, or how is this piece of argument for evolution falsifiable? If fossil record is gradual, it fits with evolution. If it's sudden and abrupt,
Mhm.
it's still compatible with evolution. So there is no falsifiability. This is why it doesn't seem like scientific evidence for evolution. You can respond.
I don't think anyone actually proposes that there's any abruptness, because we know it's a population-based or population-level process. For humans, for example, I've actually researched and looked into like the entire cladistic history of humans. Like essentially, I mean, there's so much to talk about. I mean, we essentially pretty much know. I mean, I've talked about this with, for example, Gutsick Gibbon. She's a YouTuber, biologist, like primatologist, about like the clades of humanity. Like we know it goes from like cellular organisms to eukaryotes to metazoans, which are animals. Like these are all like human clades for on the basal level, all the way to like Catarrhini, like catarrhines, hominids. Like we know a lot about like the cladistic history of humans, like because of fossils and because of genetics. And again, this goes back to the fossil calibration thing as well. Like with animals, for example, metazoans, we have a fossil calibration. Like there's specific, specific fossils that we know matches like where all other animals like diverge from, if that makes sense. Like in terms of the timeline, there's a lot of clades we can do that for, and I have them written down as well. So um, yeah, I think it is gradual. I think it does support evolution. I think it's actually really good. I can actually copy this to you. 1 second.
Sure. While you do that, I'll just respond to this point. So, in regards to
All
the
right.
your
I
point,
can't post any files here, man. I'll
uh,
put in DMs.
yeah, I will read them. I'm okay with reading them here.
So what I underlined in this photo is stuff we have fossil calibrations for, and the other clades are, I guess, more.
Yeah,
I don't
these.
know.
Uh,
Up until Catarrhini, it's all solid, and after that, it's more tentative.
yeah. From
So yeah,
from what I'm looking at here, it seems like it mentions the things that we have
because
fossil
there's a lot
record.
of hominid and hominin fossils,
Yeah, the
so
earlier
that's why
part.
it's a second part of this cladistic sequence or the cladistic what would you call it?
Yes,
Phylogenetic tree.
sure, but
It gets a bit messier because there's so much stuff to talk about.
yeah, I understand. But this is not a reference, right? Like, do you have some references regarding this from some scholarly works regarding the fossil record? Because I have a reference from Stephen Jay Gould, who himself is admitting that the fossil record, specifically with regards to human evolution, is quite meager. It's not like I've
I
posted
think
here.
you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
What was the last thing you heard? Because I think I might have been muted for some time.
What was the last thing I what?
Heard from me because I
Heard
was
from you. I can't remember. I was talking for a couple minutes there.
sure.
I mean, you talked about like gradual, like it's not gradual.
Yeah,
Like the fossil record isn't gradual.
I get
That
it.
was the point you made, I think.
You didn't hear the last part of what I said because I was muted. So I'll just repeat what I said.
Oh, okay.
In regards
All
to
right.
the fossil record being not be, being gradual, like you were saying, I don't think it is. I've linked specific references from mainstream evolutionary biologists in the comments. I can read them if you like, regarding specifically Cambrian explosion, mammals, the evolution of mammals, the evolution of birds, and the evolution of Triassic animals. Like these are four of the many specific cases where the fossil record is abrupt. More than that, I've linked a reference from Stephen Jay Gould, who's saying that the fossil record for human evolution is basically quite meager. So, if we look at the fossil record, it's pretty much abrupt throughout the history of life, and this abruptness it's not limited to the Cambrian explosion. This abruptness is present in the Cambrian explosion in the Great Ordovician. I don't remember the exact name. Biodiversification event. It's in the evolution of dinosaurs, of fish, of mammals, birds, of flowering plants, etc. There are innumerable examples of suddenness or abruptness in the fossil record, even according to mainstream evolutionary biologists. So the fossil record cannot be evidence for evolution. You can respond.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's really abruptness because, for example, with the Cambrian explosion, we're still talking about a period that's millions of years as a period. So it's not really an explosion like, one day there was suddenly like a huge like radiation of different body types and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you could call it a period of acceleration and radiation, I think it's called. Or adaptive radiation, maybe. Something like that. Yeah, it's not abrupt in terms of like, the actual like population level changes like that. Anything about that changes. I don't think it's like that at all. It's more about like, I don't know, maybe like certain selection pressures got stronger and therefore there was more rapid change in that sense. But yeah, I don't think any of these examples mean that there's like actual like instantaneous abruptness anywhere.
Just to respond to this point, when I say abruptness, or when ID proponents say abruptness, or even when people arguing for, say, punctuated equilibrium, things like that, which uh, basically argue for anti-gradualistic forms of evolution, they are not seeing abruptness in the sense that evolution occurs over one day or a few days or that suddenly. What we mean by that, it is still taking millions of years. That's not a controversial point. The problem is that in those millions of years, so much evolution is taking place that does not in other circumstances take place in much longer time periods than that. What I mean by that is, I'll just, because it's became bit of a word salad, I'll just make it try to explain it as simple as possible. In for instance 10 or 20 million years in the Cambrian explosion or in other such explosions like this, enough enough evolution is taking place that does not take place, for instance, in other cases in 50 or 100 million years or much more than that. So it's not abrupt in and of itself. I don't think you can have given objective criteria of what is abrupt or what is not abrupt. It is abrupt relative to the fossil record, and this is why it's a problem for evolution. And this is why even the mainstream paleontologists and evolutionary biologists who don't believe in gradualism, they argue based on this abruptness in the fossil record. It's not, the claim is not that this is happening in one day or in a few days. It is still happening in millions of years, but the claim is that it should not be happening this quickly based on other changes and other evolutions in the rest of the fossil record. You can respond.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what to respond. I think it's not really a problem that there's going to be a variance in terms of like, I don't know. I mean, if there's an environmental changes, like major environmental changes, for example, that there is probably like going to be like more rapid changes going on, and I mean, it's not black and white. There's a lot of like factors there, and yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. I think it's not really like a problem. I haven't seen it like being mentioned in the biological literature as a problem. So I don't know.
Uh, there is actually a paper that was published in 2022. It actually mentions that the abruptness of the fossil record to sudden appearances of species has been a problem for evolution, and it purports to give a solution for that problem. Uh, so that paper, like I can give the reference for it if you like. It is acknowledging that this is a problem and this has been a problem, and they attempt to give one solution for it. Uh, I can uh, I can link it here if you like. Uh, you can have the last word if you like, and after that I will end this because we have been here for quite some time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'll have to look at these sources.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the best thing you can probably do is like actually like email a bunch of biologists and ask them about this kind of stuff. Get some actual citations from them as well. Because I mean, I think a lot of this creationism, like these creationist talking points, a lot of the time is more like cherry picking, like this quote here and this quote here. But it doesn't really make a dent in terms of like what the data is in the field. I think that's more like it's that's what it seems like to me. But maybe you're honest and actually trying to figure out what's true. I don't know.
Uh, in regards to the point about emails, yes, I could email them, but I could also look at papers from mainstream journals such as Nature. These references are there, and actually, you know what? I think we had enough discussion, and I said I would let you have the last word on this. So I'll just end this with regards to the paper I mentioned regarding gradualism being back. I've linked it in the chat, right? It's a reference from Science Daily. You can find the paper from there. So I don't think that will be much of an issue for you to find the paper from there. I'll end the recording.